Had an early start to the day on Anzac Day. Like many other New Zealanders, I attended an Anzac non-service at 6 o'clock, which to be technical is just before dawn. I think sunrise occurs at about 6:30 at this time of the year. So I went and stood with Felicia, my wife, down by the letterbox, and we just stood and looked out over the hills, stood militarily at ease during that time, not at attention. And then after the service on the radio had finished, we wandered our way down towards Parramatta Inlet, and we sat and we looked out across the water. There was a red sky, there was scattered cloud. It was just the sort of dawn that I found myself imagining many a New Zealand serviceman had experienced as they were about to go into battle or welcomed bomber crews coming back from raids on Europe or whatever else might have been the occasion, the dawn parade. And I was sitting there in all kinds of a reverie, and it was really quite a special few minutes, when my quiet was interrupted as there drew into the car park space behind me a van with a couple of young people in it and one of those throbbing bass units going. And my first reaction was disappointment, and my second reaction was annoyance. But my third reaction on reflecting on it was to think, this is exactly the sort of young person who left on those early morning raids or who were welcomed back from the surviving bomber crews. These are the very kinds of young people out of whom soldiers and sailors and airmen and warriors were formed. And then when I thought about it a little more, I thought, and the freedom to exercise that kind of thing is why people went to battle. And I ended up thinking to myself, stop being such a grisly old man and allow people to live the lives that they want to live. They didn't ask my permission to be there. I didn't ask their permission to be there. I was able to get about my life, and so were they. Felicia and I had a number of uncles who went to battle, World War I. They suffered in various ways. One was killed. One came back with what they called shell shock. Today we'd call it post-traumatic stress disorder. He spent the rest of his life living in an institution. One came back as an alcoholic. I had an aunt, my father's sister, who lost her fiancé at Gallipoli. And all the time that I knew her, the family regarded her as a bit of a soured, perhaps somewhat embittered old lady. And when I became old enough to work it out, I could understand why. We're fond of quoting that line of poetry at Anzac Day, they grow not old, as we that are left grow old. And the implication always is that they have been robbed of maturity, youth, middle age, the ability to be the father or the mother of a family and move into a mellowed and loving old age. And of course that's true. But some of them were also removed from the possibility of becoming broken and battered and disabled and misunderstood. And I wonder of the people that I've just been talking about, how well understood they were by family and by church. I don't know the answer to that, I wasn't there, but I wonder. Certainly the alcoholic must have been regarded by some members as a failure. Here he is hanging on to alcohol. But I don't know that anybody can talk about somebody else's failure. They haven't been where the failure has been. They haven't faced the things that the failure has faced. And in the church in particular, I think it's incumbent upon us to receive all kinds of people, people that others might look at as failures, and to know that Jesus looks on them as people whom he loves. These are people for whom Christ died. And I think that mental set will be very important to us as we come out of COVID-19, when there will be casualties of all kinds, people who have suffered loss of income and of opportunity, people who are embittered, people who are broke, people who are all sorts of things. And if they don't find acceptance and kindness and understanding among God's people in the church, where might they look for it? The church has a special challenge here because the church, of course, holds a number of standards, and we want to do things well and we want to do things right. And we always have to know and to remember that that does not give us the opportunity or the right to look at somebody else who's doing things differently and to pass judgment upon them. I don't think the world is that offended by the faith of the church. Some people are, but in general I don't think the world is that offended by Christian faith. I do think it's offended by smugness. I do think it's offended by superiority. And it was interesting to me and significant that Jesus said, "They will know that you are Christians by your love, not by the fact that you hold especially high standards." Jesus himself, of course, was criticised for the company he kept. Look at him, they said. He goes and eats with tax collectors. He met one up a tree, literally, one day. And he said, "Zacchaeus, come down. I want to come and eat at your place." You invite yourself to eat at the house of good friends. And Zacchaeus was particularly short of friends, both good and otherwise. And when Jesus came and said, "I want to eat at your place," he was saying, "I want to be a friend of yours. I want to accept you. I want to receive you." There's a Canadian Christian writer who relishes in the unlikely name of Bruxy Cavey. And Bruxy Cavey says somewhere in his writings, when the church starts to look questioningly at what we're doing and maybe critically, and when the world starts to be enthusiastic about what we're doing, there's just a chance that we're starting to look a little more like Jesus. Some years ago, I spent a very wet evening in a pizza house in Nandi in Fiji, in the company of 3 other Scripture Union people. The 4 of us were all Scripture Union representatives from different parts of the Pacific. 4 of us from Scripture Union and an English hitchhiker whom we'd picked up. And we sat in this pizza house and we played a game of 500 and we talked about all kinds of things, including Christian faith, with all sorts of good sympathy. And later I wrote an article about it in a Christian magazine. And I received a very critical letter from a reader who said, "You shouldn't have been playing cards and talking about the football with this person. He made no mention of the Christian faith part of the conversation. You should have been telling her she was on her way to hell." And I was appalled at the time, and I am appalled still. It is not my call to work out when somebody is on their way to hell. That's God's call. It will not make a favourable impression on her if I had said that, even if it were true. Israel Folau found that when the world went mad, when he had made such a call. It is my call to relate kindly to such people without necessarily buying into all of their values, which are different from mine, and therefore I walk a tightrope, and I must zig and zag and run the risk of falling off on the side of undue acceptance or the side of undue criticism. And therefore I have to keep deciding. And I think that's why Jesus said, "Take up your cross daily and follow me." Every day there are decisions to be made. How are we with those who are weak? How are we with the loners? How are we with those who have failed? Happy cross lifting. It's a daily exercise.
You rescued me and picked me up, living home of grace revealed, a life transformed in righteousness. Oh Lord, you have rescued me, forgiving me. You healed my heart and set me free from sin and death. You brought me